the Democrats set themselves up for a trap because this whole time they've been saying like Trump's Hitler, Trump is like going to become a dictator, blah, blah, blah. They've like kind of exaggerated it to a point where like I think they made it very easy for Trump to like persuade people who aren't very politically that savvy simply by dialing down his rhetoric, making himself seem more moderate. So people listen to him on Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn, they're going to be like, he's not that bad, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have another interpretation of that. I think that's certainly his strategy, right? I think he might take a non-aggressive approach in some respects, like when he was on Joe Rogan. But man, at the same time, like I feel like his rhetoric now isn't really policy anymore, and it now focuses on the crazy shit. It's not typical of American politicians. American politicians hide their authoritarianism behind like the advent of democracy, while Trump will talk about he really like he admires Vladimir Putin, and I think that's all like real, like, and it's also in some ways like strategic.
There's a great book on this. It's called The Imperial Presidency by Arthur Schlesinger. And they're like, the expansion of state power and like the strength of the presidency to act kind of above Congress was a long thing in the making. So it's like the problem, yes, is dangerous that you have Trump using that. So I definitely would not want Trump to have that sort of power. But the real problem is like no one should have that power.
Yeah,
Like the president can go to war without asking Congress or
right.
anybody. It's insane. Well, America is a surveillance state. Like I don't think people realize America's, it's like China in many ways. Like it's approaching that level of surveillance.
I think it's worse. I think it's much worse actually than China. I say that because we're really elusive about how we do surveillance. China's pretty straightforward. Like
they tell you.
yes, they do, and that's pretty important. And
You're listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.
We think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite. Like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are.
When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Philosophers call someone a relativist, by which they mean it's a person that holds that any view is as good as any other view. My simple response to that is this: no one holds that view. No one believes that every view is as good as every other view.
Welcome to One Dime Radio. Today I am here with Epoch Philosophy, Ian of Epoch Philosophy, one of the best YouTubers in the game for theory and philosophy. I seriously want to say you have some of the best editing in the game. Dare I say, top 3. You have some very well edited videos, and I like that you always put quality over quantity. And you've been doing that for quite a while, so I appreciate the YouTubers doing stuff of substance. But today we're going to talk about stuff that is a much lower IQ. We're going to talk about the election. We're going to talk about the spectacle. And I didn't even give my takes on it. And you've been waiting to get some takes off. And I was telling you, like, I've been wanting to tweet about it a bit, but I'm like, this is unproductive. I'm just going to save it for a pod or something. So we're just going to have like a general conversation about the 2024 American election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. A lot has changed in the past 3 months. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, I guess without further ado, Ian, I think the audience might be aware of you already, but maybe you can remind them.
Yeah, so I guess Epoch Philosophy. I've been doing this, and me and you have known each other for years now. Back when I first started, but God, I've been doing this for like 4 years. Essentially, just make videos on philosophy, theory, kind of like applied art. There was a moment there where I was like making more videos about applied art than philosophy explicitly for quite a while. Honestly, way more enjoyable, but not too good for the algorithm. But yeah, so I guess kind of just like whatever I want in that kind of general sphere of critical theory, political theory, kind of deal. So yeah, guess that's just me, I suppose.
Yeah. Some people might be thinking, like, why would I get epoch philosophy to talk about the US election? Why not talk about theory? Why not talk about philosophy? But you're an American, so you're
Yeah.
obligated to share. Did you vote for Kamala Harris? Or else you go to Gulag.
We were talking about that. I guess so. To be fair, like I'm sure a lot of people would be like, "Yeah, why the fuck are you having this guy on here over, whatever?" Actually, my background really is like explicit politics. Like my undergrad and how I actually got into like philosophy proper was political science. It really was my disdain for like the field of political science that really drove me towards philosophy proper.
That's what we first talked about because we both have that background.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. God, I always forget too. Yeah, your master's was political science, right?
Yeah, I like that because the people I studied with my masters were smart, but like the people I studied with in undergrad, I mean, a lot of smart professors too, but like technocrats, centrist,
Yes.
establishment, Patrick Bateman stuff.
Dude, yes, 100%. And like the biggest thing with political science is it cannot view politics outside the frame of like a really narrow, it's not even like a wide lens of liberal democracy, but like a pretty narrow lens of liberal democracy in general, I think. Like it's everything. It is really, I think, kind of in a lot of ways, the best way to describe political science is like kind of the worst parts of positivism as like a general like kind of philosophy or worldview nudged into like political theory, I guess. And that might be a little unfair towards like the whole field at large, but it really, political science is kind of really split up between political theory and like political science proper. And maybe you can correct me on this because you've been on the graduate level, but it does seem like academia is predominantly dominated by political scientists proper who view politics as like pretty much a merely quantitative endeavor in some sense. And there's kind of this idea, this abstract notion that everything within politics, behavior, groups, ideology can be siphoned down into like these categories that are pretty set. And I think as like an undergrad, that was really my experience. At least my department was a lot like that. I was just like, this is, to put it bluntly, I thought it was really stupid. And I guess I think my political tilt or my interest in politics at large, I thought was complemented with critical theory. The Frankfurt School is like my big first, like, real, like, holy shit, this philosophy thing, is actually, it's actually got some really interesting answers for some things for people who are kind of, either fed up with kind of how general politics goes in the West, how we conduct politics or exchanges of power, whatever you want to call it. I thought critical theory grants a lot of context into a lot of the things that we are kind of embedded in. But yeah, I essentially, in a lot of ways, I've always been kind of an overtly somewhat political person. I've always had like a really big sense, like ever since I was a kid, like a big sense of like justice. I know there's a huge philosophical debate on whether justice is actually like a good thing. But
that's what drives people to be politics. Politics is heavily morally charged.
Oh, dude, I can't. So that's actually interesting you say that because I'm firmly in that camp. There's also the level too of like how we can look at the world. Like moral systems are inherently extremely subjective and they're based upon its set time in history. My own morality is shaped by that, and we can't avoid that. Yet, with that, I also still, I still can't really see. I can't really see a world that, or an approach to like how we want to see the world without having some type of like moral apparatus behind it. I find that incredibly difficult, and I know there's a lot of people who, and this goes across from like you were talking about the Marxian end to even like the Nietzschean, like postmodernist end of things being where like, well, again, morality is this type of really elusive subjective system. There really is no morality. And I'm not going to say like I fall in the middle or anything. I genuinely do still see myself implanted within the frame that I find morality an important outlook and like an important baseline to just kind of everything I do. But I understand the shortcomings and of thinking that way, or I guess at least thinking that way in the sense of, your morality is universal, I guess.
To tie that into what you were saying about political science is that a lot of the language people use and the things that people use to quantitatively measure the performance or the adequacy of certain countries or systems, it's presupposed.
It
Like
is.
the democracy indexes. Like
Yeah.
it's all that's presupposed, the criteria. Look, I was an anti-imperialist before I was like a leftist and before I was a socialist. Like I started off anti-imperialist because I'm half Lebanese. And, I've always kind of known about the history of Israel and America through that. So I was already like, studying political science, and I saw America is ranked like in the top percent of like the democracy index. It's not the highest, but it's ranked pretty high in these mainstream rankings. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like CIA exists. And then, I only became a leftist, quote unquote, just because like I was in a politics class in high school and we had to do like mock parliament. And I chose the NDP, which in Canada is like the Social Democrat Party. And the teacher would always call me the socialist in the class because he was a conservative. He was a conservative. He was a great teacher, but he was just calling me to say socialist. So I'd be like, all right, like if that's socialism, sure, fuck it. And it kind of unironically had the opposite effect. Like it made me like more sympathetic to like Marxism later on because in 2016, I think is an experience for a lot of people. Like 2016, the first Bernie run, when he lost lost to Hillary is when I like looked into Marxism. And I was like, oh, okay, they were spitting.
I had a pretty similar a similar kind of thing. From like ever since I was a little kid, like I always like if people, and I know this sounds so like self-aggrandizing and whatever. I don't know. I guess it's probably a good thing that I did feel this way. I don't mean to like suck my own dick or anything here, but I just like anytime like I was really not a big fan of like cruelty or like I guess just injustice, like unfairness, any of that. It just always rubbed me the wrong way. And I think it should do that with everyone. I don't know, but it felt like particularly like impactful to me. And I remember I was in class and we had to read, we were forced to read like current events. And this was in like 2011. It was during, or 2011 or 12. No, it was in 2012. And it was during like the Obama Romney thing. And at that point, I like actually had to start looking at like policy positions. And, as kind of half-assed, I guess what you would call like neoliberal, his views are and how we should, conduct society and whatever. Obama was, in my mind, way more like it felt really like the idea that like, oh, we should cover more people should have health care. And when I was a kid, I would read that and hear that, and then also hear other people being like, that's insane. I'm like, what the fuck? How is that insane? Like, like I don't want people to die or like spend a bunch of money and like be in debt forever. And even as like I was in 8th grade at the time, and even in 8th grade, I was like, yeah, that's weird. I think I'm definitely on this like Democrat side thing. I was like, at least I can say that like out of the Republican Party, Democratic Party, I much prefer the Democratic Party. It was like at a very young age, I understood that. And then of course throughout high school and stuff, just reading a little more about like kind of the real general like political system in the US and how really pretty right wing it was, even from a Democratic perspective. And by the time I was already pretty like I want to say like I had a fairly decent idea on how things were ran, from pay to play, quid pro quo, corruption, everything in the political system by the time I was about like a junior in high school. And it wasn't until I was a senior when Bernie Sanders announced his kind of candidacy. And at that point I was like, oh yeah, definitely a fan of Bernie Sanders. I wasn't really too big of a fan of like that kind of area of politics, I guess the kind of Clinton-esque Democrat. But yeah, I guess that was kind of like my trajectory. But I mean, yeah, I think after 2016, I think I also felt that too, where my understanding of like an interest of Marxian theory as something that can help describe the core basis on how our political system operates with capital definitely started paying more attention, I suppose. I know people kind of say, and it's kind of a cliche and can sound a little cringy or funny. It's like, yeah, I guess I was radicalized by, Bernie Sanders, whatever. But
No one wants to admit it. So many people have. Like,
Yeah,
I've noted, I've met people who are in their 40s or 50s
yeah,
who they got radicalized by Bernie Sanders.
my mom. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, and we're talking about the election now and kind of our political state where it exists. And so I guess we can maybe step back to because I wouldn't be surprised. Well, probably, but I'd imagine your audience, like, you have pretty smart people in your audience for the most part, I would imagine. And,
Yeah.
like, I voted for Kamala. You're like, you straight up like, who'd you vote for? I ended up voting for Kamala Harris. And I guess this kind of goes into kind of the political arena and climate.
Are you in a red state, a blue state, or
I'm in a pretty red state. I think me and you were talking about this before. I could have voted green and it wouldn't have made a difference. There's some things about the Green Party too. I wish that there was a little bit more focus on local stuff. I know that they do local organizing for sure and
they
stuff.
don't do shit? Look, I voted for the Greens. My vote, because I'm a dual citizen, went to a state that is always blue and a county that is always blue. I won't say what, but it's always blue.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter. I don't feel like I'm contributing to Donald Trump fucking winning. I just like to make no illusion about it. Like,
Yeah.
the Greens are just a protest vote. If you see the Greens as anything other than a protest vote, it's totally delusional. Yeah, anyone who thinks that a third party, with the current arrangement that exists, with the current system that exists, that a third party can come to power, you're out of your mind. Like, there's no possible way. Like, that it's not only is it the likelihood of the Green Party becoming the president is so low, just like winning the presidency is so low. To even get anything done, they would have to get in Congress, Senate, and that's like 3 battles. Look, and you have a first past to post system, which means like, the districts are counted in a way that makes it like a vote for a third party is basically like a vote for the enemy. Now, that's not a problem if you're in a state that is always blue. But like in certain swing states, the Green Party, like, it's been debated as to whether, like, if people didn't vote green in certain moments, whether like Democrats would have won. But there were certain states that, like, for example, Ralph Nader and Clinton versus Ralph Nader in the Gore versus Bush election. There was a couple states in which if all the votes that went to green went to the Democrats, Gore would have got it.
Right.
Like, it would have made the difference.
Yeah. Actually, like a fair critique. I know there is a lot of like crying about Jill Stein, and you can say whatever you want about her. But yeah, she certainly doesn't have the type of impact, I don't think, as someone like Ralph Nader. But yeah, I guess in general too, like, it's also, we should probably highlight too, even, because I know a lot of your audience are pretty explicit Marxist. It's probably like, we should probably recognize too, even the discussion around.
You'd be surprised.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's like, it's a huge mix of people, like many Marxists, but I like to say like enlightened Marxists.
That's cool.
Like, people come out enlightened Marxists. It sounds very self-aggrandizing, but you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain type of Marxist. They like
just touch grass.
Yeah, they didn't touch grass. They think like it's they take it like a religion where it'll give them simple answers, but then they come out of it in a more nuanced way.
And I don't mean to like,
bunch of
I think the whole idea of like touching grass is a little bit of a silly notion. Like, we all are in our little bubbles of whatever, but I guess that point still stands. I think voting in general, like the entire electoral system, really isn't going to innately change much on the side of Democrats. So like, for example, if we ensure that Democrats are staying in power, what's that really going to grant you? On its own, really not, almost nothing, pretty much. I think it's arguably fair to say that. It's not the same, though, as Republicans. I don't think we should treat it as such. Like, I know there is this idea, and I think most recognize this isn't the case, but there is kind of a general idea that the Democrats and the Republicans are kind of equal on the part of like tangible harm. And I think that is a massive mistake. And I just think completely untrue. I actually really do think this. I know there's, like Noam Chomsky said, the Republican Party is the most dangerous organization the world has ever seen. And that sounds crazy as fuck, like, to anybody. Like, you could go, like, don't go to a party and say that to like anybody, or like, you can't, just saying that in general in isolation sounds insane. But, and of course, his real main basis is climate change. And I think it's completely correct that, like, we've never seen an organization so dead set on the complete dismantling of human organization. We've seen like really terrible authoritarian, movements that have sought to overthrow an existing type of organization and implement a really brutal, horrid version of one. But we've actually, in a way, until the Republican Party, we've never actually seen a single group, political party, organization that is almost just dedicated to just literally destroying all of it. Like, it's actually impressive, and I don't think it's wrong to say that they are the most dangerous organization that humanity has ever seen. I really don't. I mean, maybe someone can make an argument against that. I haven't seen one yet that is compelling, but if that is the case, certainly the impact of them being in power is something to be concerned about. And it's like, I am concerned about it. I know that if we can beat Donald Trump, beat Republicans, of course, like most policy aims that we want, healthcare, what have you, fucking genocide in Gaza, what have you, that's not going to really come from voting for them per se, but at least gives you the opportunity to at least get to a point where you could possibly like mobilize and really do something about it. I know there's the counter argument that there is a type of complacency when Democrats are in power, and I do think that is real as well, but that doesn't, in my mind, change the fact that at the end of the day, it's still pretty pivotal to fight against Dems versus Republicans, and also live in a society where, like, generally, like, I think the Republican Party is kind of just a genocidal organization, even outside of like climate change and whatever. In general, like, as far as people outside a very specific sense of like like, I don't know how you'd, I guess, describe it. It's not like they're...
I mean, the Democrats are kind of funding genocide right now.
They are.
People say that, right?
I mean, they are. Well, I think as far as like a prescriptive argument on how the demographics, like, where, like, I don't think Democrats, even the Democratic Party, you do see some xenophobia around Arabic peoples, but I think as far as like as a core like ideological tenet, like, that's like, I think it's very clear to say that like the Republican Party is a white nationalist political organization, and I wouldn't say that about... I would
actually... I think that's actually changed.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, because I follow the white nationalists, like the fascist type crowd, like a lot on Twitter, just to see like what they're up to. And they have this sort of infighting. Like, actually, like Nick Fuentes, last time I checked, maybe he's changed, but last time I checked, he was telling his supporters not to vote for Trump, and a lot of it is over, like, look, the white nationalists, they're anti-Israel a lot of the time, but for the worst possible reasons ever. So that's a reason. But also, they like really don't like the fact that JD Vance's wife is an Indian. Like, they just really don't like that. And, I think that after Trump, there's going to be an attempt to try to make a post-racial Republican Party. Like, there's going to attempt to do that. Because, yes, you're kind of right in that it is like the more white nationalist party. However, I think like Trump has been trying to like appeal to minorities, and he's been doing better with minorities, actually better than any Republican candidate since Reagan.
Yeah, I did.
Says a lot, right? Like, he did better with minorities than Romney or McCain or Bush did, which is pretty fascinating.
That is interesting. I think the only thing I might say to that too is that I don't, depending on the context, I don't necessarily think, though, like, an incorporation of different races into your political like party or ideology itself wouldn't necessarily make it less white nationalist. Like, I want to say the whole sphere of the Republican Party still is kind of geared towards a very conservative ideal of like a white homogenous America. It's a real, but again, we're talking about like a very postmodern ideal of like a conservative idea of this. Like, there's almost like this want or drive towards an aesthetic vision.
Parody fascism.
Yeah, of like a world that...
Parody fascism.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, and it's like, sure, maybe you could make the argument, right? It's like, well, then if that is the case, that they're not technically white nationalists in a very explicit traditional sense. But I'd argue maybe, and that's fine. That could be the case. And I'd argue almost in a way like maybe we ought to like expand like what we mean by an explicit like white nationalist kind of thing. I guess. I guess they could apply to the Democratic Party as well. Like we could say like on the surface, like they're not xenophobic at all, really, like ideologically in a way. But what we see through policy and the type of like attitudes towards the Middle East, we see that there is this very Islamophobic like
Oh yeah.
thing within. So yeah, I totally see what you're saying for sure. Yeah, I guess in my mind, I've actually kind of jumbled through those thoughts before. So yeah.
When it comes to your general point, though, about the Republicans being just worse, look, the way I like to express my take on this sort of thing is I really like to emphasize that in America, you are choosing between two factions of the party dictatorship. Like when people be, oh yeah, America's not a democracy. We know it's a republic. No, you are like Russia.
Yeah.
And your choice is between Putin and Dmitry Medvedev. Okay? Like, that's how it should be taught. So, like, there is a difference between those options. It's not to say that there isn't.
Right.
It's that, at some point, you need to get out of that malaise, right? Like, at some point, you need to, like, really find a way to get out of that because it's a trap. That's how they keep people trapped. And is that two-party rotation, the good cop, bad cop. Who do you prefer? You should prefer the good cop. Like,
yeah.
And this is the thing about like voting for the Dems. I totally see both sides of the argument, kind of. Like on the practical level, I think the Republicans are way worse on two things particularly. One, we already said, the climate.
Yeah.
It's insane. I recently listened to the Joe Rogan interview with Trump, which was horrible. We'll talk about that after. And like Trump's environmental policy just seems fucking horrifying. Like it's bringing all the things that are making the climate worse. He's just putting in turbocharge. It's like accelerationism, but in all the worst way. So that's just a nightmare. The Democrats like are actually better on that front. Like they're not doing enough, but they are better, and they at least kind of tried. They didn't try hard enough. But on the climate front, yeah. On Gaza front, so this is what confuses me. People on Twitter often say like, I'm not voting for for the Democrats. I'm not voting for Kamala Harris because of the genocide. Then I'm thinking like, look, out of any issues, like I would understand this issue pretty well. Like currently Lebanon, we have relatives still at, is currently, being bombed by Israel. I have a stake in this issue, right? But like, I don't understand why that is out of all reasons to not vote Democrat, because the other guy, said to Israel, finish the job. And he said, I will blow Iran to smithereens. And like, look, it's not even just Trump. It's the Republicans are the neocons. Like there's this delusion with Joe Rogan and these libertarian doofuses.
Yeah.
Okay. Where they think like Trump isn't a neocon. He had Mike Pompeo in his cabinet. And Mike Pompeo, Trump tried a war with Iran the first time. Like they literally killed a fucking general. Could you imagine if they killed Douglas MacArthur?
Dude,
the Soviet Union shot Douglas MacArthur. Like that's a declaration of war. They baited them into a world war. Thank God Iran is, sane in not, being hungry for war. But it's crazy. And they're like, look, people talk about it, the Israel controls all of the American government. I think they probably do blackmail certain politicians. I think it's more with the Democrats, to be honest. But the Republicans, they support Israel because they believe it. I don't know about Trump. I think Trump, they got something on him because like he's not a religious guy. But these evangelicals, like they think their destiny as evangelical Christians is tied up with the Israelites.
Yeah.
So, it's fucking crazy zealotry, and they want a war with Iran, and they don't give a single fuck about Palestine. So it's like that out of all reasons to not vote for the Democrats. Like I get the climate, but like Gaza, like you realize the other guy is way worse. Like just is. It's if you give a fuck about Gaza, you should not want Trump in office. So like I just sympathize voting for Green as a protest vote in like states that are already blue or like that aren't going to make a difference, basically. But like in a swing state, like what?
I know that's kind of where that's kind of also too. It's really, I always thought that's a really insulting thing to kind of abstain from. Like, I can't vote for Democrats because I care about Gaza, and I really understand the cynicism. I totally understand. I mean, yeah, Democrats are, by all accounts, they're completely on board with genocide, 100%. That said, though, if you really are concerned about an individual's life in Gaza and Lebanon, if that is like your real main concern, if you are concerned with genocide, yeah, like it's really fucking clear, though. Like, the Republican Party is like borderline, almost as genocidal as Israel, the state itself. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the other things. It's like the potential loss of kind of Arab constituents in a place like Michigan as well, like, very well could be possible. And the Democratic Party needs to, in all their fucking stupidity, they obviously need to know that people in these situations aren't going to necessarily think rationally, in the sense when they see what's happening in Gaza and Joe Biden is in the office. It's like, not everyone's going to come to that actual core rational conclusion that, like, oh, well, it would be a lot worse under Trump, whatever. There's going to be a type of emotional impetus towards their voting habits. But I think, like, for the people in the Middle East, that's unfortunate, because I think at the minimum, there's definitely probably a quantifiable level of like bloodshed that could be avoided if someone like Trump was not in office. Enough? Probably not. But I also think in general too, the Democrats strike me too as well. Like, I think sometimes when you come from the perspective of political economy, which should never be discounted, but when you do look at the lens of political economy and how politics interacts, I think it can be easy to kind of forget the ideological element to that. So, like, for example, here's another way I look at it. Like, I don't think Joe Biden like hates workers, or I don't think Joe Biden in a sense is like he looks at this and he wants to ideologically do things that will harm workers. I think his like sympathy probably aligns with most working class people. He probably looks back as being whatever, fucking Scranton, Pennsylvania, whatever, and he probably does have some like I guess some level of compassion in a sense, but obviously he's so tied to, again, this is where the political economy comes in. He's so tied, his hands are tied. And I think in a sense, the kind of democratic approach is like the kind of wrestling with the devil. It's, if I want to make a difference, I need to, take money so I win the election. So this happens. And then what happens is you're embedded into a system that's doing really terrible things and you justify things. But I think that's a lot different from like what we were talking about, having like, Donald Trump doesn't give a fuck about workers. Republicans don't give a shit. Like, matter of fact, I think they disdain them. Like, their whole goal is to like completely disempower them.
I would disagree with you there.
You really, you do?
I think like in terms of how they might rationalize it to themselves, like I think like JD Vance in his brain genuinely thinks he cares about workers.
Oh, you think so?
Like in his brain, yes. Like, I mean,
well, maybe.
I mean, did you see his like hillbilly orgy, whatever it's called, fucking hillbilly herd trilogy? I don't know what it's called, but it's the movie, but it's based on the book about his life, and it was fascinating to me because like the movie, and it's actually quite good. Amy Adams plays his mother, and she does an excellent job. And the movie, I felt, was weird that it's like about like it's supposed to be about JD Vance, and because to me it was like a giant endorsement for socialism. Like it was showing how the people in the South are so poor and like they don't have medical care and they don't have opportunities. They struggle with addiction. But, like JD Vance's message from that is like anyone can make it out of it if you just pull yourself up and like blah, blah, blah. But also we need to help the South and the poor white man who, has been left behind, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, the working class people have been left behind. Like this is fact. And I think they do want to address it. They just have like a kind of strange way of doing it. Like their ideology is that you're going to like help the workers by having a lot of tariffs and bringing the jobs back. Like I think they genuinely believe that.
You do,
but to me, what I would say to them is like, Trump had the chance to do all of that, and like, he did not bring jobs back.
I'm really torn on that. Maybe someone like JD Vance, we can perhaps make that argument. Yeah, probably way more definitely simple. I struggle to believe that with someone like Trump. I'm not a psychologist, whatever.
I don't think Trump gives a fuck. I don't think Trump cares about anything other than his own like power and his own like legacy.
Yes, I think so. And I think there's like a lot of Republicans too, though, in Congress in general, like a very scary level of like antisocial like behavior. I that's kind of one of the differences I've always kind of seen is like, yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there probably is that type of disillusioned, like ideological, like sympathy towards, working people. I kind of think that is the case with a lot of Democrats, but I struggle to find that type of symmetry with the current Republican Party. I really do. I mean, I would like for that to be the case. I don't know. I'd probably have to sit and think about that because I mean, the amount of just insane shit like across the board, like not just like policy, like rhetorical like, positioning towards like unions, but I guess that is kind of changing a little bit now with the Republican Party, but it's all bullshit. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean the Republicans they have unions behind them, but just the cop union and the
that's it.
stuff like that. But yeah, what I do want to, well, actually, it's something worth mentioning before I get into the whole like backdrop into like the build up to like Kamala even being the nominee, because I think that is worth analyzing. But like to me, the big thing that I think is making it worse for the Democrats right now, because like I thought the Democrats had this in the bag, but it looks like they're struggling.
Yeah,
It does look like they're struggling right now. And look, they're not making it any easier for themselves because they're like just going so like they're making themselves, I don't know what they're trying to do. Like on the immigration thing, they're basically saying like, yeah, build that wall, which I remember in 2016, that was what they were like attacking Trump for the build that wall thing. And they were presenting that like that was some sort of fascist idea. Now they're saying, oh, well, they're like he's stupid for not building that wall fast enough.
yeah.
And we're going to do it better. And I'm like,
actually,
how are you going to compete with the Republicans over like an anti-immigration policy? Like they're the kings of that. You can't compete with that. I don't know what they're thinking. Like,
I think definitely rhetorically, right? Like as far as core messaging goes, towards your base, towards the people that are going to vote for you and enthusiasm. Yeah, that's really bad politics, like doing the whole Liz Cheney thing. But not only is it bad politics, the other element too, it's just not, it's morally, I think, pretty terrible to ever legitimize those types of views as somewhat normal is ridiculous and also hurts. It also hurts us later on, like when we actually try to do good things for people, for immigrants, for whatever. The normalization is how the Overton window shifts right. That's terrible. I have read a little bit. There's some like data to actually support though. Whether or not you should run with it, I don't think so. I think the approach is that technically speaking, and this is a depressing little tidbit of data. From what I've read, they're trying to, in a way, rhetorically, they're trying to court generally people who just don't really give a shit about politics in a way, like people or like people who are really not very educated either. So people go off of like type of like gut emotional impetus towards how people are conducting an election, and there's a lot of people in a really, I mean, this is an issue with education in the US. There's a lot of really dumb people who there's that like that kind of like the kind of ecstasy of like centrist positioning where you don't have to do any mental work to really figure the ins and outs of things. And so when you're presenting yourself as a candidate who, like we're better than them, but we're also kind of, what? You kind of like feed into that really Americanized idea of like intellectual laziness. And
well, it's like,
yeah.
the thing is, the Democrats do those policies. Like, they do like have harsh immigration policies. That's the whole irony. Is like they're
Yes.
presented like they're open borders and all that, which no one should be for open borders, by the way. Like, I don't know where this became a progressive position, like to have economic imperialism be like a progressive position. But
Yeah, I look at the open border like thing in the context of in a world that I want to live in, like we wouldn't have borders. But yes, I understand totally.
yeah, an ideal world, right? It's like abolish the
Yeah.
police. Like,
Yeah.
look, abolish the police is one of those things where like, okay, well, I don't think actually like abolishing the police is ever possible until you abolish the state, which is I don't think possible until like probably like 10 generations.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like the state is another thing. Before like capitalism has existed for like less than 400 years. States existed for like thousands of years. So like, okay, but police, like, look, I totally see defund the police, like, in a context where, like, after you dealt with the real sources of crime, that's good. We shouldn't have stormtroopers being like the cops. Like, I went to Japan and I was mind blown that most of the cops don't even have a gun.
Yeah.
And like in America, they have like, they're just literal, like, it looks like Star Wars. It fucking blows my mind. But look, the calling for defunding the police before addressing the sources of what is causing crime, i.e., like poverty, job opportunities, etc., drug addiction, that's just a stupid policy. It is like if you're going to defund the police before dealing with the crime, it's going to just lead to like the crime with less responses to it. Like, it's a very different thing from being like having policies that like have cameras on the cops, or like making sure the cops are held according to the law, and like all kind of mechanisms to prevent police brutality, right?
Yeah.
But like the idea of defunding the cops, it's like, I view it kind of like also with the immigration thing. It's like, you have to deal with the source first. Like, why are people like, the reason why I wouldn't be hawkish on it, on like the wall stuff, is because people are going to still try to go, because like, why are people fleeing? And it's because, like, where are most immigrants coming from right now? It's Venezuela.
Yeah.
Why are they fleeing Venezuela? Because they're sanctioning Venezuela. Maybe don't sanction Venezuela, you won't get so many legal immigrants. Or Haiti. Like Haiti,
same with the Middle East as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Haiti especially, a lot of immigrants from Haiti, and it's like that country's been totally like destabilized by Europe and America. So it's like, maybe help Haiti, you'll get less illegal immigrants. I see the problem with illegal immigrant. I don't think immigration, like, no one wants to be an illegal immigrant. Like,
Yeah.
I think everyone would prefer to be a legal immigrant. So it's like, when people say, like, they'll comment, they'll be like, oh, you don't think it's an issue? It is an issue, but like, there's just better ways to deal with it. Like, which is at the source,
Well, also the abolish the police thing, I think it might have been kind of probably in a way, perhaps we could make the argument, an unhelpful rhetorical stance in our current political reality. I mean, I think I'm probably there as well.
When you look back at things, it's crazy that one new thing in the future, like a new event that happens, can change the entire way you see the past. It's crazy to think that just recently, everyone thought at one point Trump had this in the bag when he got shot.
Yeah.
And I remember that changed everything. When he got shot, the assassination attempt, and he had that iconic photo. And then, like, Kamala Harris picks Tim Waltz and totally killed all the steam. Everyone forgot about Trump. Nobody remembered. It's like it never happened. Events don't happen anymore. And everyone was Kamala's brat, Tim Waltz, JD Vance is weird. Haha, Democrats are going to win. I thought, I was like, it's Democrats got it. And then, like, Elon Musk is jumping up and down like a fucking 2-year-old. And like that also did, I think, more damage to the PR of the Republicans. And now it seems like something just completely shifted.
So
all of the podcasters, all of the comedians, Joe Rogan, Tim Dillon, Theo Vaughn, they're all having Trump and JD Vance on their podcasts. And it's like,
so
what's happening in history right now?
I've been thinking like, oh my fucking Lord, like, Jesus, like, what the hell? Like, how has he like clawed back into this? And this seems to be pretty plausible, because I was looking at it. There's been a couple people who pointed out that a lot of the polls that are being pulled into aggregates like 538, that are kind of taking all of them, there's quite a few polls that have popped up that their methodology is a little suspicious, like very rightward tilting, whether that be in their questioning, where they're polling within a state. A lot of things, and a lot of the pollsters who are already labeled as like a partisan pollster, I think Rasmussen is one of them. There was a couple others that I was reading about. They're already technically kind of considered a partisan polling institution. And so they're weighted less on something like 538. But for some, even though they're weighted less, there's been a lot more of their own polls coming out lately for some weird reason. I don't want to speculate on to why. Some people obviously are saying that like the Trump campaign is like paying for polls to come out. I wouldn't put them past them. That's kind of good news. So maybe to kind of put your mind at rest a little bit, because I also was pretty like, what the fuck, man? Like,
he claims the opposite. He's always saying that the polls are rigged against him.
Historically, he kind of has a little bit of a point with that. Like the Democrats as a party, like in congressional races, seem to outperform the polls since 2016 onwards. Like we've outperformed there. Donald Trump has he has way overperformed in the polls, which is also, that's another anecdote there that's a little scary. That really sucks. I think we genuinely just don't know where we're at right now, which is actually which sucks because yeah, you'll like what I was saying, like we have like there's been a huge stark increase in polls that come from what we would traditionally consider right-leaning partisan polling institutions. But then we have the idea that like also Trump does outperform presidential polls he did in 2016 and in 2020. So that sucks. There's another video I saw that was interesting. Donald Trump, and this is bad news on the surface, and it's just what you can make of it of what you will, but it was interesting. Donald Trump has been increasing support, and you were saying this earlier, amongst like Black, Latin American voters, and he's actually had kind of a pretty stark increase, but they make up a lot less, like those people make up as an entire electorate a lot less than white voters. And Kamala Harris has made per number less, like there, you know, say I don't know the number. Trump say he's gained 10% in the Black vote. Kamala Harris has gained 5% in the white vote, but the white vote makes up such a larger portion of the general American electorate that right now people are kind of thinking, like analysts are kind of thinking, like this actually could be a blowout for Kamala Harris. And I don't know where I'm at with that. One thing I do kind of think is that this election, I have a gut feeling, I don't know if this will be true, I have a gut feeling that this election won't be as close as what we think it will. Matter of fact, it could be at a wider margin than 2020. I have a gut feeling that either Trump is going to win at a way larger number than what we expected, or Kamala Harris is going to. I think it's more likely that that happens with Kamala Harris than it is Trump, but I don't know. That's kind of where, from what I've been reading and everything, kind of where I stand. But I've been in doom scroll mode a little bit lately with this, and I've been like trying to find the full picture of what's going on, and that's kind of the consensus of kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's hard to predict. It really is. Like I thought the Democrats had this in the bag, but the momentum does seem to be shifting to Trump. And in our new information age, people are like goldfish. They forget things immediately. And like I was listening to this Joe Rogan podcast with Trump, and I lost so much IQ listening to it. Like I swear to God, like Joe Rogan, man, I have sympathies for him. I'm more sympathetic to him than a lot of leftists are. But this guy is the most gullible fucking person on earth. Like he is so gullible. Like he's like a libertarian, but he didn't ask Trump a single question about like mass surveillance, about like his hawkish policy, all the neocons in his cabinet last time. Like the most he said was, Trump said, "Oh, I appointed some bad people like John Bolton and then I fired them." But like he just like made shit up the whole time. And look, that podcast got so far I think it was 28 million views. That's enough to turn an election in America. Like I know, 28 million, that's globally, and that's people around the world, but still, like America has the most stupid electoral system in any liberal democracy on earth. Yeah. Like in the sense that literally like just a couple of swing states, literally a couple hundred votes in some cases, like really a couple thousand votes, but still tiny margin will ultimately determine, the entire election of just a couple of states. Like it's really Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and what else? Like what other swing states? Maybe Texas this time. I'm not sure. I doubt Texas is not going to Kamala.
Probably not. No, definitely not. Yeah.
I don't get why they just didn't pick Tim Waltz. I mean, I get why, because he's too radical for them, even though he's not that radical. But like for the Democratic standards, they rather him be vice president, where you're basically powerless unless the president dies. But like if Tim Waltz was the guy, I think he would run, because frankly, I think a lot of it does. Like I don't want to sound like pull an ID poll fucking Hillary argument here, but like I think yes, the fact that she's a woman and the fact that she's half Black and half Indian,
yes,
like that is absolutely gonna be a factor as to like people like not voting for her. Like there's gonna be people who are gonna be like, hey, I don't trust her,
dude. 100%.
Why?
I know. No, I'm with you. And it's really unfortunate. I think in some ways, maybe not. I know a lot of people talk about a lot of quiet racism in Europe as well, like a lot.
Oh,
And
Europe's not so quiet.
oh, well, yeah, maybe so. I've heard a lot of people they go to Europe and they're like, "Holy fuck, this is actually like really like it makes sense given some of their recent political history." But Italy,
I
it's
think
like,
Europe's way more racist than America.
not that
Like in
totally
France, you can
actually,
be a third generation Algerian and you're still not French.
yeah, that actually totally could be the case. To be honest, that's an interesting point actually, because I have kind of that is very true. There's I don't know exactly what it is, but there seems to be a pretty stark difference in the type of racism in the US versus Europe. I think America though, I think this is well, other people have pointed this out. I think America in a lot of ways and like what we'd our traditional view of liberalism being people who are like they buck the system, they buck traditional norms, whatever. Oh, America is like by and far one of the most liberal countries in the world in my mind in that sense. And I think that's one of the ironic points. And in my mind, that probably helps Kamala a little bit, but there does seem to be this just general reactionary pull. And sometimes when you talk to people, I know this is anecdotal, but man, sometimes you'll talk to people and they're seemingly normal-ish. No one's really normal, but you know what I mean? Like, it's like not very racist. And then you talk to them, they start going on about stuff, and you're like, holy fuck. Like, okay, like this, like, okay, wow. All right, I didn't expect to hear that. That happens to me a lot. Well, not a lot, but it's happened to me quite a bit living here. So I don't know. I think it's true. Her being an Indian, half Jamaican black woman, that it's going to play a role. And I think someone like Tim Waltz, if he had the full primary kind of run, I think he'd be mopping the floor with Trump. I really do, actually.
Which is also a kind of big risk in the Democrat strategy is not having a primary. Like, I think that is not a good look because they're called the Democrat Party and they didn't even elect the person. Now it's like, look, I live in Canada where like our parties are vanguard parties. You have no choice in the leader.
Yeah.
And the leader can also dismiss members in the party. People don't realize like America is like a more undemocratic in terms of like corporate influence, in terms of the Supreme Court and Senate and all that.
Yeah.
And in terms of like how insane, like you have a deep state and shit, it's fucking nuts. Like, you guys are like Pakistan, you don't even know it. Like, like, but in terms of like parties, the selection process of selecting parties in Canada is way worse. Like in America, at least you can, choose the leader, even though there's all super delegates and all that stupid bullshit. But like they didn't even do that, and it's the Democrat Party.
I know.
And like I remember in 26, I forget when it might have been 2020, but I remember it's 2016 in the Democratic primary. It was Bernie and all of them, and Kamala was running, and I remember she got like 1.6%, something really low. She got dusted by Tulsi Gabbard. I remember back when people thought Tulsi Gabbard was a leftist back then. Yeah, she wasn't very popular. And like, look, I think they've tried to maybe like brand that. And I thought maybe she had a chance because look, I remember all that like brat meme and all the clips of her laughing. And when they were trying to attack her, they're saying she has a crazy laugh. Like it didn't seem like it hit hard. Like it made me kind of sympathize with her more because like I view Kamala like she doesn't really know where she is. She just like the VP and she's put in this place, but she's like kind of just like, I'm like laughing away. I'm like, fuck my life. And I think a lot of women like relate to her. I know there's a huge gender divide in politics right now. Like we can talk about that. It's crazy. All the women I know, they're all like pro Kamala.
Yeah.
And like, well, then again, most of the people I know prefer Kamala, but kind of biased point of view. But it does seem like Trump's strategy right now is to really go for men who are 35 and under. If you look at all the podcasts he's going on,
Yeah.
I mean, he went on Aiden Ross's stream.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is, I also think it might be a mistake in the long term. But yes, I know that's definitely, dude, the gender divide, it's actually really disturbing how fucking dumb some like Gen Z male and Gen Alpha, like you're not Gen Alpha, but what's the beneath Gen Z? It's looking pretty bad as far as like
Millennials is older, and then the Gen Alpha I don't think can vote. Gen Alpha can't vote.
Is it Gen Alpha? Anyways, yeah, no, I don't know if they can either, but I think it was like really young Gen Zers. I was reading like, yeah, the divide is like men are vastly more on paper conservative than women. That said, though, women now I don't know if this has always been the case, but recently I think women have actually outvoted men since like I want to say like maybe since all of the 2000s, perhaps. But I know at least for the most recent American history, women have been the larger voting bloc. It might not be like a lot, but I also see among young people, women are way, way more likely, I think, to get out. Whether if you were a young dude who's a fucking idiot and you just you think Trump's funny or whatever, and you support him on paper, I guess, in a way, like if someone asks you, I can find there's probably a level of apathy there that if something happened throughout their day on election day, they just wouldn't go out and vote. I find that being a lot more likely than a woman, particularly with if the Republicans didn't have the reproductive issue going on around, they'd be wiping the floor with the Democrats 100%. I mean, it would be just not even it wouldn't be close. But I think given that and how starkly like women support Kamala Harris, that I don't know. I'm actually like truly like, and the more we talk about it, the more I think about it. My brother, I've been talking to him about it. Yesterday I was like, God damn it, dude. Like I was reading the polls. I'm like, I'm getting the fucking anxiety. And my brother is insistent Donald Trump is going to lose. And I hope he's correct. But the more I think about it and the more I've read, I think it's probably more likely Kamala Harris wins. It's just obviously way too close for comfort. And with the ironic spin that I have a gut feeling that whoever's going to win, if it is Kamala, she's going to win by a larger margin than what we thought, or if Trump wins, it's going to be by a larger margin. That's my ultimate prediction, I guess. Yeah.
Do you think it would be women who would be the deciding vote? Because like it does seem to me like if Kamala wins, it's because a lot more women show up to the polls.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's not hard to see why. Like Roe v. Wade is, I think, really what politicized a lot of women, like because like that kind of showed like, oh, your rights are actually like kind of, they're not guaranteed. It's like, I think that was like a wake up call for a lot of people.
Right. I also think we touched on this a little bit. Like I was speaking on like her like courting the Cheney Republicans. It might have the ironic effect of like courting voters who are too lazy or stupid or whatever. I don't want to sound like too insulting, like, whatever. People who don't necessarily look into these things. And the quickest thing to cling to is like who seems like the most reasonable. I think there's like
I think people who don't normally vote would want to vote because
that is like that's one of the biggest, technically the potential voting blocks in the country. I mean, I think people like the independents who are like really independent, right? Like really independent who like, i.e. they're not very politically involved. I think people who don't pay much mind to politics and they see that, it might kind of drive them towards Kamala more than it would Trump.
It's Liz Cheney though.
I know.
Cheney.
Oh, don't get me wrong.
Like nobody likes Dick Cheney, even right wingers.
I know. Don't get me wrong here. But again, we're talking about a political population of people who really just don't even give a shit about politics. So it doesn't hold the same weight. Like as far as firing up your base, getting volunteers going, no, Kamala Harris is doing a fucking terrible job. That's like, you don't want to bring Liz Cheney along. I don't think they should have done that. I think at the end of the day, we might see an ironic, like we might actually see, depending on how we look at it, I wouldn't be surprised if there actually was like some weird net positive to that. Again, just given how like a lot of people are so disenfranchised with how politics works, that not necessarily out of education, right? Like me and you or other left-leaning people, just by nature of living in the US, not having like really good educational systems that teach critical thinking, that do whatever. They're just people who like this sounds dumb. I don't really think this is a thing, but like NPCs, people who kind of just go to work, whatever. I don't think that's not like a real.
Look, I actually think NPCs are a thing, but like I think like, but I think it's less so like I think they'll vote based more on the aesthetics, and look, now everybody does that to an extent, but like I think the NPCs do that like just totally on aesthetics, and like
Yes.
the type of people who voted for Bush because they thought he would be a good guy to have beer with.
Yes.
Like, but I just don't think that like Kamala is doing that. Whereas I think Biden, to be honest, did a better job of that, because
Maybe.
Biden was so stupid and so just like all over the place, so like not a smart guy,
Yeah.
that I think people didn't see him as threatening. Like you look at Biden, you don't see Machiavellian. You know, you look at Hillary Clinton, you see Machiavellian.
Yeah.
Like you just see it. Like she's very calculating. You know, she's been in all these the highest power centers ever.
Talks about
Like,
hot sauce on a predominantly black podcast.
Yeah. Joe Biden is a puppet, but it's obvious. It's at least like it's nothing like. Look, it's a really silly way to view the world, right? But people see Biden, they're like, okay, well, at least like it's nothing worse. And I think a lot of people vote from that kind of conservative disposition. Even people who vote Democrat, like they vote from this disposition, like who's going to be worse? And if you look at the policies, it's clear the Republicans are worse. But like if you just look at appearances, I think people will choose like they'll either go for the person who looks the most humane or the more competent. And I noticed Trump has done something very different in his strategy, because in 2016 he was like the radical, the insurgent, and that kind of worked in his favor because many people didn't show up at the polls. Voter turnout increased insanely under Biden, and Trump lost. And Trump was, a lot of things went bad, like January 6th, sorry, but after that, but like COVID, right? A lot of circumstances, like, but he's portrayed as incompetent.
Right.
But I noticed Trump's whole strategy now, he's been very like tame. He hasn't said as much crazy shit. He has been like, his frame, I noticed on the Rogan and the Theo Vaughn podcast, was that Kamala, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's inconsistent, blah, blah, blah. And here, when I was in power, I did this. He's making all this shit up. He's acting like when he was in the White House, he was like, had the greatest presidency ever or something. But like, people are really like, they have memories of goldfish. So maybe it'll work. I don't know. My prediction, I'll just say this, do the antithesis, I guess, the thesis antithesis. Where I kind of think Trump's going to win, unless like Kamala pulls something like, pulls something.
I really hope you're wrong, but I mean, you could be right.
I hope I'm wrong. Wrong.
Man, there is just so much. There's another argument that even beneath everything that we've been saying so far, that I'm sure people have been in their heads screaming that like, perhaps here's like that perhaps throughout all of this, like even Dems winning could hurt us more in the long term. Can you imagine, and I thought about this, during the Epstein stuff, that when it was just coming out about a year ago, I love how Trump got out of that unscathed, which is
crazy.
Fucking insane. But can you imagine if Hillary Clinton was president and she was on her 8th term, and Bill Clinton, everything that came out, can you imagine? No,
oh, man.
Oh, I mean, I don't think we'd ever see a media storm like that in our lives. Like it'd be 9/11 level, like fucking, I really think so. So I guess that we could cling to that idea that like the more, I mean, a kind of a very traditionalist view of accelerationism. I'm really very skeptical of stuff like of that, because it's obviously an incredibly dangerous and frankly, in the short term, harmful thing to do. But I can't lie that there's a compelling sort of logic to that could be real, that like if Trump wins again, essentially, perhaps there's an argument that Americans are so technically and typically sheltered from so many things that like until we make Americans hurt, they're not going to realize like really hurt. Obviously Americans been hurting, but the argument, I guess, what's that?
What if he does a good job?
What if Trump does a good job? That
I don't think he'll do a good job, but like, imagine, look, he said a promise on the Joe Rogan podcast, which I think is utter horseshit. But if he does it, not gonna lie, I was like, I might move to America. Said he was going to abolish the income tax. That's not on his official platform. He said he's going to cut it to 15. But he said he's considering abolishing the income tax and replacing it with tariffs. Now that would probably cause inflation because of, tariffs are pretty inflationary in a capitalist world economy. But like, abolishing the income tax, That's not like, you're not just improving the lives of the rich at that point. You're just improving the lives of like just so many people.
Well, that will never happen. But like,
It's
even if it did,
I don't think it's happened.
yeah, even if it did happen, I think the actual economic ramifications of that would just null everything to the point where like we would fuck so much stuff up that people have way bigger issues to be dealing with than how much they're being taxed. Ironically, like Trump has, dude, I pay higher taxes because of Trump. Fucking sucks. Like
Really?
yes, 100%. Yes, the tax plan in the US right now was Trump's tax plan at the moment. So, God, my taxes, mine and my wife's taxes went like, God, I might pay like, and mind you, we have no fucking healthcare or anything here. Where all this money goes to just like bombing children, and then also it goes to Social Security.
It goes nowhere.
Yeah,
Well, unless it's from the state
it'll
level.
go to Social Security, but like honestly, like if we're down the path that we're gonna continue going, we won't have it. But I mean, dude, like I think we pay like nearly 40% income tax. Like it's not quite there, but around there. And I get like, dude, I have health insurance. My wife, again, me and my wife are having a child, and she's sorry about that. And we've gone to 4 appointments. We haven't even had like a couple of them were sonograms. Most of them were really routine doctor visits about pregnancy. We have health insurance, and it's through her because she's actually employed somewhere in America. Like, you know, me being self-employed doing this YouTube thing, I don't got fucking health insurance. So she's the, she helps me with that. And so, but she gets probably around $200 out of her paycheck, each paycheck out. And we have racked up, even with insurance, all like 4 doctor's visits, nearly $1,000 in medical bills. I'm not fucking around. I'll tell people that. I have a Swedish friend of mine. Shout out to Cedric. I have a really good Swedish friend of mine, and I told him that, and he was like, "Are you fucking serious?" Like we all know America is like diabolical when it comes to healthcare, but even that surprised me. I thought even with our healthcare, like health insurance, we'd probably rack up maybe around $100 out of pocket stuff. No, we're at like $1,000. Yeah, it's dismal as fuck.
Absolutely insane. But that's look, this is something that I think the Democrats have to blame for if they don't win against this insane clown fucking literal. It's actually, to lose to Trump is such a fucking
It's impressive.
embarrassment. It really is. Look, it's someone who, look, you mentioned the accelerationism thing, and I have an accelerationist take, which is like, I kind of think Trump undermines American hegemony more than any other president ever.
Yeah.
Because he delegitimizes America's global image. And also, like, you got probably like 90% more books written about democracies ever since he was elected. Most of them are terrible, which is why I decided to write one. I didn't think that I would fucking need to write a book, but I've read so many books on democracy, too much that once I'm done this book, I never want to think about it ever again in my life. But so many of them are so bad. But like, the point is, Trump really did like get people thinking about like all the worst things going on in America right now, like whether it be imperialism, whether it be a democracy. And I think, it's some of his like isolationist, even though he's very hawkish, some of his isolationist policy when it comes to like collaborating with Europe has pushed Europe to like increasingly want to go independent. Like, if Trump says that he wants to not back Ukraine, which like there's some good things out of that, but like, look, if you're an American patriot, I'm just thinking an objectively standpoint. Like, if you believe like, if you want America to be like dominant in the world or whatever, like, you do not want Trump. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think, some people might think, it's good because he's gonna go war with Iran, but no, that's Israel's problem. Like, America doesn't benefit from that.
Yeah.
And like Trump, if he decides to not back Europe and like make the NATO people pay for more for military and stuff, and he's not going to back Ukraine and stuff, which is going to deal now the Russia issue with Europe only.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be them versus Russia.
Yeah.
Europe's going to go its own way, which, to be honest, that's kind of good for undermining American influence. It's like, it's hard to see. And look, I will just say, like, I do have a stake in America. Like, I believe America has potential. It could be a utopia. It has the greatest land in the world, and it has a liberal tradition, which, if it actually used, would be nice, and extended that. Frankly, America is just like, anyone who's American should be ashamed of Donald Trump. Like, that's just an embarrassment. It just really is. So like there's the accelerationist aspect, and there's also just the fact that like I think, look, I would benefit actually from a Trump administration. I've thought about this. Like, and the reason I would benefit from a Trump administration, and you would too, actually, maybe, and it's because you know what created the rise of left tube? Donald Trump got elected, and that's what gave rise to quote unquote bread tube. I know we're not bread tube; we're more like, you know, in the theory history end, but like, you know, it gave rise to like this whole demand for like dissident content. And you do see that whenever there's a conservative administration, people watch left-wing content, and when there's a liberal administration, people gravitate more to right-wing content because it's, you know, anti-establishment. And I thought about this, like I benefit from Trump, but like, look, if from the standpoint of what is best for America overall,
Yeah.
not just the external and internally, like I think in terms of like racial tensions and all that, like climate, you want this guy out, like you just do. You want to never see this guy ever again. I swear.
That's my conclusion, man. Like another thing too, and we were talking a little bit about irony, and this goes into like the accelerationist thing. There's a lot of dismal shit, and we can maybe end on this too, because this is probably, you know, I don't know. I always think it's kind of important to reiterate this as well when we do talk about the actual technical kind of merits of like someone burning down the system. Like I get it. Like, and there's a compelling like logic to be had there, like that we've avoided some catastrophe with like in the long term by not having Hillary Clinton. Obviously, you know, with the judicial, like the Supreme Court, whatever, but we could have gotten a Trump that's way worse, whatever. But there's a lot of like dismal, ironic kind of like, again, just like black pilled shit. And like, you know, you know, this isn't like some radical departure from what I thought even before I was going to have a kid, but I'm going to have a kid. And like that, like right now, that's actually scaring me a little bit. Like if I knew, no joke, if I knew that this sounds horrible, and I know this is kind of like a personal thing to talk about, but you know, it is what it is. If I knew Donald Trump would be president tomorrow and, you know, I would have it like, and it was like, I don't know, like when I was thinking about like, you know, potentially like my attitude towards having children as like, you know, because I want children and I've always wanted children, but I would have to look at things a lot differently, you know, with climate change, you know, whether that would be like, I'd be worried about them like in the long term being able to, you know, and possibly their children and stuff. And that shit freaks me the fuck out. I think there's people are miserable, and there's like this disposition of, I want to say, not like overtly hateful, but just like almost neglectful idea of the care of other people. I see that a lot. And I know that's like humans have always done that, right? Like there's the idea that I think in general, we value life a lot more nowadays than we would like 200 years ago. But there's
I think you're right that we're definitely less collectivistic. We're more individualistic for sure.
Yeah, and it's almost like even more than that. Like, I see like there's this kind of like, I know this isn't philosophical nihilism, but for language to help people understand, there is kind of this nihilistic tonality to like nothing matters and, you know, whatever. And I think that bleeds over into how people treat other people a lot. I kind of detailed this I was talking to you earlier. I'm kind of detailing this in a video that will be coming out, hopefully at the end of November. But it's essentially, I'm making a video about like kindness as like political philosophy, as like not just like prescriptive, but kind of analyzing kindness in the context of political theory. And I make a kind of a lot of arguments that like, one, there's a lot of shit that's going on, and then two, like I think things like care for other people are just such a core requisite for anything in society. And the more technocratic we become, the more, I want to say almost like smart or intellectual in some sense, I think that we risk kind of forgetting about that. And I think even Trump, someone like that, like it just, we're hurling ourselves down things that are so much more than even just systemic. This is like, you know, I know, like, I don't know. It concerns me a lot. I don't like in so many different facets, even above just politics in general, that I really cannot stand and I don't like.
I think we'll get into the theory discussions more, I think, in the back room. And it's kind of related to that because I think irony is something to be theorized. Though I just want to touch on two things that we didn't get to touch on with regard to the election. One is JD Vance, because I think he changes a lot in the game.
Yeah.
And, generally the VP stuff. But also, like, I think one thing I definitely forgot to mention is I think the Democrats screwed themselves by not doing a lot of the things when they have the chance. Like, for example, okay, like a big thing that people are talking about, like, is the climate, Roe v. Wade. But okay, these are like we have a Democrat in the White House now. And like, I know, like with Roe v. Wade, it's the Supreme Court. But look, in theory, if Joe Biden wanted to, he could pull a Franklin Roosevelt and threaten to pack the court, to expand the size of the court.
I don't know why he
Which is
has
what
it.
he is.
It's a giant bitch. Clearly, there's something going on there. I don't know.
Or he could pull a Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, which honestly, I would highly recommend learning about that. Like I visited Mexico and hung out with a bunch of people there, and it was really great experience. I was mind blown by how much progress the Morena government has made.
No shit.
They kind of had like a Mexican Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. I know exactly. Yeah.
And like Claudia Sheinbaum, she's just the successor of the same party.
Right.
She has a policy to make basically have the Supreme Court be elected.
Dude.
And have term limits.
That is the thing. Like, if Kamala Harris does get elected, if there is political pressure from people from like the ground up, dude, like Puerto Rico, Washington D.C. statehood, like pack the courts or abolish the Supreme Court. Obviously, it'd be best, but do whatever you can to fucking tear down like the overtly anti-democratic like systems, like old structures, dilapidated fucking terrible ideas of like. Stupid idea of like classic democracy, whatever the fucking founders were thinking. Well, they were thinking about their own power. But I'm with you. That's like the one thing. And the fact that Joe Biden hasn't done any of that, dude, I don't know. One thing that freaks me out. Do you remember when Obama, I think during his like lame duck, when he was about to leave office, I think he pardoned like something like 500 plus prisoners. I don't know what the fuck I don't know what Joe Biden's doing. Like I don't think he knows what he's doing, to be honest, but like, it's really disappointing. Like that dude has like jello for a spine.
Yeah, and it's like no one believes in Kamala's promises because she's the current VP, and I know VPs don't really have like that much power, but still, like from the eyes of the average person, from the public, it's like she's part of the system, and if the people are in power now, why aren't you doing the things that you're promising? Whereas, like Trump has this very incredible power of just rewriting reality. Like he's just such a bullshitter. It's insane. Like I was listening to him and like it was bullshit to me, but I can totally see if you don't have like the memory to fact check, he just says so many lies that it's like impossible to like verify all of them. And because he's so confident, like it really does. Like I think like a lot of people are gonna be like, yeah, the economy was great under Trump.
Yeah.
Like even though the economy is not actually bad under Biden.
Yeah.
For capitalist, general, like mainstream economic fucking indicators, Biden's doing a far better job.
Right. No, dude, I'll give a shout out to, I'm sure I don't know if you've had him on, but Matt McManus as well.
Oh yeah, he's coming on tomorrow.
Oh, is he? Holy shit.
Yeah.
Please tell him I said hello then. But postmodern conservatism, I actually think like as as a concept, like a newer-ish concept that's been talked about. I know I'm sure that's definitely been talked about in the past, but like as someone, he wrote a book on it a few years back. That's kind of actually, I got to give him a little bit of credit here. Like it's hard to talk about some like relatively novel-ish things in a philosophical framework and write a book about it and it be on its own. I got to really give credit to him for that. Like postmodern conservatism is an incredibly concise, really well described, like political reality at the moment that I actually, from like a really nerdy academic, I don't think we give him enough credit for that. Like, I don't think anyone really talks about it, like in actual academic circles.
I think his new book's even better.
Is it?
Because that's where I read it up leading up to this in the interview that I'm going to do tomorrow.
Oh gosh.
Is a political theory of liberal socialism.
Oh, that sounds great, actually. I need to, dude,
I have some disagreements, but it's really excellent. Like, it's a good history. Like, if you just want like a history of liberalism and socialism, it gives
yeah,
you all. It's really good.
I genuinely think Matt is like, I don't look like, I don't, for as involved as like me and you are, you strike me as someone you're a little closer to me in that respect too. Like, people would be surprised how little a lot of my day-to-day life, like other things I do outside of like doing this channel, has little to do with philosophy and whatever. And so like, I'm not always like, there are some people who are like, dude, when they're into theory and philosophy or whatever they're into, I mean, that's like all they do. I'm not like that. I'm ADD brained as fuck, and I have interest everywhere. But like, when I think about it today, and it's just like, in a way I kind of miss, just like talking, in some sense about this, because I don't talk to anyone in real life about this. Like, all my friends they actually have nothing to do with like philosophy, whatever. Like, actually, I know, it's funny.
It's kind of why I started a pod. I mean, I did have friends who I talked about it with, but they would sometimes just be like, you should just start a pod, but like, I didn't feel like I don't know, like, I wish I had the fucking delusion of like a streamer. Like, I don't get how those people can stream and like talk all day. Like, how can you be like so unaware of your own like lack of knowledge? Like, I still wouldn't be able to stream just because like I just don't get how people talk that long. But I like pods because I can like to have someone else on who can also like contribute something interesting to it. But this has been a great conversation so far, and I'm very excited to talk more about theory, because that's what you do, Epoch Philosophy. And we'll shoot the shit about politics too in the back room as always, which my patrons get access to. If you haven't been part of the back room yet, you're missing out. There's at least 40 exclusive episodes all on my Patreon. It costs you only about $5 a month. Instead of buying another goddamn Starbucks latte, you could pitch in for your boy. And if you haven't checked him out already, I would highly recommend Epoch Philosophy's video essays. They are excellent. And yeah, thanks for being on here, Ian.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'd like to come on again at some other point. I know you said you had a backlog of people, but it's always fun doing this. So,
My only hope is that when enough people become pessimists, then out of despair somebody maybe does something. But you know why I also like to be a pessimist? Because it's the only way to have a nice life. If you're an optimist, then always bad things happen and you are always disappointed. When you are a pessimist, then you look around, okay, there are bad, but from time to time something nice happens, and you are, as a pessimist, you are a little bit glad all the time, no?
You are listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.